Lucas, Lewis, Payne and Pinniger. Councillors Clark and Harvey may be late, so I haven't looked around the room to see if anyone has already arrived, but yeah.
Clark's here.
Councillor Clark. Sorry, I'm trying to spot her now. Oh, sorry, there you are, right there. Sorry. So yeah, if there are no other apologies, if anyone's aware of, then we'll move on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. There are none on that side of things. Then item 3 is minutes of the last meeting. So this is the meeting held on the 15th of May. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to read through them. Are there any comments at all? Sorry. Councillor Harman.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Just briefly, we did congratulate a number of people at the last meeting due to their service to the town. I thought we didn't mention and congratulate Alex Chalk on his appointment as Secretary of State for Justice and Lord Chancellor. So I thought we should add that to the record now. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other updates on the minutes? Councillor Hay.
It's not an update on the minutes. I'd actually quite like some clarity from our lead monitoring officer, because we wouldn't ordinarily add something to 2 minutes that wasn't mentioned. And I'm happy for this time I can do that in my leader briefing, and then it will be in the minutes. But for me, would that suffice?
Minutes retrospectively.
I'll say, thank you. That seems like a very sensible way forward. Thank you. In that case, can I ask everyone, assuming everyone's in favour, well, to vote on the approval of the minutes then from the last meeting? I believe this will be on the... is this on the system, or are we doing a show of hands? Sorry. On the system, sorry. So hopefully that should be up in a second.
Councillor Baker's not voted.
So Paul, if you...
I've got everyone there. Councillor Baker? He's pressed it.
Tap it on the screen.
Tap it on the screen. Oh. No, top right. If you voted for. There you go.
Sorry, Councillor Clark. Sorry, Councillor Clark, I believe we haven't registered, we haven't recorded a vote yet.
That's it.
Okay, I think that's now everyone. So that is 33 in favour with 2 abstentions, so that is passed.
Oh, sorry, Mayor.
Oh, absolutely.
I just remembered that I was absent, and therefore I shouldn't vote for the minutes. Can my vote be changed to abstention, please? Thanks.
That we can do. Okay. Item 4. So this is communications by the Mayor. So I've got a few items just to run through here. Firstly is to regarding Honorary Alderman Martin Hale, who passed away in May after a brief unexpected illness. Martin Hale, he was a former Labour councillor for 3 different wards in Cheltenham: Hester's Way, Pittville and Oakley. And he was a councillor between 1986 and 94, and then 95 to 2006. The second item on communications is regarding Annecy. Following the horrific attacks in Annecy, our French twin town, we've written to them to express our shock and our thoughts to the victims, their families and all those affected by such despicable violence. I hope, well, I'm sure everyone here will agree that we stand in solidarity with the citizens of our twin town against this terrible and senseless act. Now, at this point, I would like to ask those who are able to stand for a minute's silence in reflection for those first 2 items. Okay, thank you, members. And then the final item on the communications, as many of you may know, Councillor Payne is currently taking a leave of absence from the council to undertake caring responsibilities. I won't go into any details here, but I'm sure that anyone who knows John will know that this wasn't a decision he would have taken lightly, and I'm sure you'll all join me in wishing him the best. So that concludes the Mayor's announcements. Item 5 is to hand over to the Leader of the Council for communications, Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Councillor Babbage, or Mayor, should I say. Forgive me. So I would just like to add my condolences to those of yours. I knew Martin and Diane quite well, and at the time, I remember it was quite an unusual situation. There were actually 3 sets of couples on the council at that time of differing parties. And Martin was a well-respected member and very committed to the ward that he represented latterly, and that was the ward of Wadden, Linworth and Priors, which is now known as Oakley. And people, you know, when I first started door knocking in Oakley, it was like, well, Martin is always there. We see him, he pounds the street. He just used to walk around. So he was very, very well respected. A couple of other bits in this is that we've got an upcoming Cheltenham Zero Sustainable Travel Showcase, which is an inspiring event covering all things sustainable travel, including fleet transition, EVs, accessibility and active travel options. And the special guests at this event includes Cleveley Motors, Stagecoach and of course our own council. This takes place on Tuesday the 27th of June at 9 o'clock until 1 o'clock at the park campus, and you just need to, it's free, you can register on Eventbrite and go and join that event. Congratulations to all those who received their trophies at the end of the Cheltenham Skittle League's prevention night on Friday. Yeah, I'm matched particularly to our Mayor, Councillor Babbage, whose team, Albion House, won the Men's Division 4 Championships. Also, as many of you will know, every year we have an amazing feast of art where people open their houses. So it's open door arts studios across the town. There were some 200 homes and artists that opened their homes and all their venues to that. One of the other, just very, for me, it's worth briefing council on this. So as you know, we've got a trust. The trust have agreed a card that will go to people who are participants of the food pantries in order to get the Cheltenham Feed Leisure Pass, which is a free leisure activities, either individually or for families. But you must be a member of the food pantry to benefit from this. Last Thursday, I was at my community centre, and it's our food pantry day. And there were 2 beneficiaries of this who actually were really excited about the fact that they'd gone swimming. And these are adults, and they wouldn't have been able to do that because they couldn't afford to. So that's a fantastic initiative that this council, in partnership with the trust, has put forward. My final one is just that, to say that subject to the audit committee agreeing this next week, Councillor McCoskey is stepping down as chair, and for which I'd like to record our thanks to him for his chairing of that, and to say that Councillor Adrian Bamford will take over the chair of that. As I say, that's subject to the committee's decision next week, but I thought it's worth noting here because it'll have to come here next time otherwise. Thank you, Mayor. My apologies, I didn't write it on my piece of paper to say that actually what I said I'd do is to congratulate our current MP, Alex Chalk, on his appointment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hay. And thank you, Councillor Wilkinson, for presenting all the trophies. It was a lot of them to get through. So item 6, to receive petitions. I'm not aware of any if there's nobody indicating, we will move on to item 7, which is public questions. So there are 3 questions. The first, and sorry, I should say, before we get into questions, obviously we will take questions and written answers as read. If, I won't ask that repeatedly every time, so if anyone doesn't want to take them as read straight away, then please do indicate. And as, I mean, everyone here knows the drill, but supplementary questions need to relate to the answers that were given, and equally the answers to the supplementaries need to relate to the question. So, question 1 from the public questions. I'm not aware that Mr. Potter-Peachy is here.
No.
So we will move on to question 2. And I can see Honorary Alderman Anne Regan is at the back there. Did you have a supplementary question to your first question? Okay. Question 3 then.
Excuse me. First of all, thank you to the members for your attention to my questions. As you know, there is now a critical shortage of housing in this country, especially social housing. This town needs to work harder to supply more social housing. So my supplementary question is, what proportion of social housing and private housing will the site hold? And connected to this, how many residents are on the Cheltenham housing list?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Regan. It's not Councillor Regan, my apologies. And well, I think it's a little bit too early to say as to right now the numbers on the site. Right now, I haven't got the information to be able to give you. But the second part of your question, I'll have to supply to you. I haven't got those numbers to hand, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. On to item 8 then, members' questions. So we have 5 members' questions, same update as before the public questions applies. So question 1, Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I take the answer as read, and I thank the Cabinet Member for his action in helping to pick up the things we've missed. To be helpful, if he looks at the sign outside trail finders in High Street, and they've done some correction. On the one side, where the key is, not the map, they've taken it out, but it's not on the other side, so that could be looked at. And just to make him aware, at the recent Jazz Festival, which I'm sure he attended, that I enjoy very much, they had the same signage on the metal barriers around the Jazz Festival. It might be worth checking about the forthcoming Food and Drink Festival or subsequent festivals. I welcome the second paragraph very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Harman, and thank you for the pointers. Obviously, officers do audits of these things when they're raised in council, and I think I'm grateful, and officers are, to the previous questions that were asked by Councillor Nelson and by yourself, Councillor Harman. Clearly, we need to make sure that all the signage is correct, and I know officers will be listening to the comments that you've just made and will be responding accordingly.
Okay, question 2, Councillor Harman again.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. Again, take the answer as printed. I suppose the thrust of my question was, looking at the trees, how many of the trees which we have planted, which is good news, have been funded directly by this council?
Thank you, Councillor Harman, and thank you also for the fact you're describing this self-evidently as good news, that we are, from the County Council side and also from the Borough Council side, planting so many trees, and indeed, indirectly, more trees are being planted due to things like the Podback scheme, which of course is something which we've led on in this Borough Council as well, and now there's a small forest planted near Greatfield School as a result of that. I don't have the precise figures at the moment that you're asking for, but I will certainly ask our trees officer, Chris Shavas, to provide that to you.
Okay, so question 3, Councillor Fifield.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Max, for your response. I think it's fair to say I was quite surprised how frank you were in the response, and I thank you for laying out the facts. It would be really great to know if you have an idea in terms of time frame when we should know definitively whether the waters will be drinkable again or not, basically. You've got that.
I don't think there is a timescale. As the answer details, the idea is that in the next couple of weeks, the consultants will be up on site at the pump room, carrying out further tests. Clearly, as the answer also states, if it turns out that the source is contaminated and it's not the system, then this becomes a much more difficult thing to solve. And I probably wouldn't be holding my breath if it turns out that the source is contaminated, because clearly if it's a question of replacing machinery, that's one thing. If it's a question of working out how you deal with water that is in the ground and is going to go through the machinery in the first place, that's another thing entirely. But, you know, Councillor Fifield's answered a few questions about this in the past. It's in his ward, and I know he takes a big interest. I would suggest perhaps, you know, a site meeting so he can see it for himself might be a useful thing, and then he can be reassured that no stone is being left unturned.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fifield for question 4.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, thank the Cabinet Member for his response and confirming it is still earmarked for disposal. There were some EV chargers that were installed there quite recently. I was just wondering whether, or I think I've spoken to the Presbyterian Parish Council about that. I was wondering whether that decision had been made with that disposal in mind, and whether there was a plan for the EV charging to move if that was the case.
Thank you, Councillor Fifield, and thank you for your original question. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any EV charging in the car park. I was up there recently. I'm just trying to think, was I in the wrong car park? So there isn't any EV charging there. I know it's one of the conversations we have had in the property team, because I know that with conversations with the ward councillors trying to provide a benefit, or at least trying to make sure we provide benefits to the community wherever possible. So it is in one of those ongoing conversations. There's been no decisions taken. But as I said in my original answer, that conversation will happen with the ward members at the time. Thank you.
Thank you. And then question 5, our last one, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the Cabinet Member for your response. And I too was delighted, I do have a supplementary, I too was delighted to see the full display over the weekend, just gone. My question is, when was that decision to expand the display from just the ground floor taken? Was it perhaps as a direct result of the question I submitted on the 8th of June, given that on the 9th of June I met with a senior council officer involved in the planting initiatives to discuss various matters, and I was advised that there would not be any hanging baskets or second floor boxes this year due to cost constraints. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Nelson. I can say hand on heart that I was not involved in any of these decisions. No doubt you were influential in some way, shape or form, but I won't say that necessarily it followed directly from your intervention. So can I have a look into that to see the timing of it? But I'm not giving away anything here as to whether it was you or wasn't you. We should celebrate the fact that it has happened, and I think we're both doing that. And doesn't it look glorious at the front of our municipal offices now?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Doby. That concludes the questions. So moving on to item 9 now then. So this is on voter identification. So I'd like to invite the Electoral Registration Officer to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor. Members will recall in December 2022, a motion was put forward at full council, which resolved to ask myself as the Returning Officer, Electoral Services, Electoral Registration Officer, to report back to this council on this authority's proposals to minimise the risk of disenfranchisement from the voter ID proposals, which are due to be enacted nationwide from 2023 and would apply to all elections in Cheltenham. The report in front of you today articulates actions being undertaken to comply with the request within that motion. In addition to that, it makes recommendations to formally appoint 3 named Deputy Electoral Registration Officers to provide extra resilience for signing voter authority certificates, and also request that £20,000 be made available from the designated earmark reserve to promote further actions as deemed necessary. I think the report itself is self-explanatory. Kim Smith is sat to my left, who's our electoral services manager, and I are happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, so any questions from members? So we'll start with Councillor Atherstone.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and also thank you for bringing this report to us today. It's really great to see the engagement strategy in terms of like doctor surgeries and leaving leaflets at Food Cheltenham, etc. And you mention also the canvassers, the electoral registration canvassers. I was just wondering if there is like a set plan for which doors those canvassers might be knocking at, sort of focusing on various sort of concentrations of neighbourhoods, or has that not been set, or is there no fixed plan? Like, can the plan be sort of influenced so that it's more likely to knock on the doors of people that are less likely to have the appropriate identification? Thanks. Okay,
well, I'll try answering that in the first instance, and I will be looking over to Kim if I say something that's incorrect. But to all intents and purposes, in terms of the household inquiry form, all residents or all households will have some sort of form of notification. So we'll obviously be able to sort of communicate directly in that format. In terms of the door-to-door knocking, that tends to be those individuals that haven't returned their household inquiry form. I wouldn't want to speculate and make a direct correlation to suggest that those that don't return their form are also the ones that don't have any voter ID. But obviously, as and when we get that sort of information through, then I guess we'll be relying on the information coming back from those sort of canvassers in terms of what was reciprocated on the doorstep.
Okay, next I have Councillor Chelin.
Thank you. I noticed that the Electoral Commission will be publishing its analysis shortly, but in 4.3 of the paper, it tantalisingly says that the ID requirement posed a greater challenge for some groups in society and that some people were unfortunately unable to vote as a result. And I did wonder whether or not that there was any analysis of that you could share with us for our area.
Yes, the only analysis that, so in terms of the recent elections in May, as we all know, Cheltenham didn't have any local elections, but under a sort of mutual aid scenario, a number of Kim's team did actually help at the Forest of Dean District Council. I think in terms of the numbers, it was quite low, well, extremely low, but I guess the difficulty is if you then correlate that to the turnout, which was also low. I think that's why, from our perspective, rather than try to second guess in terms of our experience at just one authority, we would rather rely on the information that takes a broader look at what happened nationally.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I read some news that suggested that the government was already considering expanding voter ID requirements, for example, to postal voters as well. And I wonder how this authority is taking into account the potential for the legislation to be expanded and how that actually impacts the processes that people follow, because it's not quite clear to me how that could happen in a way that doesn't result in a huge amount of additional bureaucracy for those in electoral services, and also a huge amount of difficulty for those who traditionally vote by post. Many postal voters, as all of us as councillors will know, are in an older demographic, and postal voting is something that is often used by people who struggle to get out of the house for reasons of disability. And I think that's something that would be a huge concern to most in this chamber, because we don't want to further disenfranchise people while clearly there is a risk of, well, there is evidence already out there that this legislation has disenfranchised people already.
We haven't got all of the detail yet for this. The secondary legislation detail should come out in October, and the people with a postal vote will have to supply some further information. They will have to be verified just as they are when they register to vote. So there will be an additional layer for them to be able to continue to vote by post. And postal votes will be in force for 3 years rather than the current 5 years. And they'll have to reapply each time rather than just refresh their signature and date of birth. So there are changes. However, we do also have, if people haven't got that, the it'll be national insurance number really that has to be verified, and obviously they have to be on our register, but there will be a further process, as there is now for people that haven't got that information, whereby we'll be able to verify, we should be able to verify them, or they'll be able to hopefully send us some further evidence so that we can say, yeah, that is that person. So yes, there is going to be a bit more for those people too. Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Wilkinson, did you want to follow up there?
Yeah, if possible. I mean, I understand the circumstances in which our electoral services department work, and these are imperfect times, and when things get sort of trailed out with little suggestions rather than detailed proposals from the government, it doesn't make things easier. But for me, your answer doesn't reassure me, and it's not your fault. Your answer doesn't reassure me that if, for example, I have an elderly relative or an elderly resident who is in their 80s or 90s, they want to vote in the next election, they don't have access to the right kind of documents, they can't leave the house, they can't come into the borough council offices and talk to someone face to face because they're housebound. It doesn't reassure me that they're not going to be disenfranchised. And if there is one thing that I think goes back from this debate today, the subject of disenfranchisement is something that I think we need to raise with our senior officers and at a higher level with government. I would hate for us to get to the next local elections and for there to be hundreds, if not thousands, of older and disabled people who are not able to vote.
Yeah, I think that was more of a statement than a question, but
the question is, if we don't know the process yet, are we asking about what that process is going to be and how we're going to get the answers, so those people can be briefed in as much time as possible?
As soon as we know what we've got, we do know, we will be contacting everybody that is affected. So it will be anybody that's postal vote is coming up to 3 years and onwards, and all the new application forms will have all of these details on. The other thing is people will be able to apply for their postal vote online. They won't have to necessarily fill in the paper form that they do now. So in some ways it's harder, but in other ways they will make it a bit more accessible as well. So, okay.
Okay, thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask a question about the fact that Cheltenham Borough Council is paying for this, and therefore the people of Cheltenham. And is there not a way that, under the new burdens doctrine, that we could ask the government for more money for this, especially following the revelations made on LBC by Jacob Rees-Mogg, which seemed to imply that this was intended as voter suppression by the government that he was part of at the time. Because I think the people of Cheltenham would be very unhappy that they're paying for all of this stuff to happen when the government have clearly are the ones that have caused it. And the new burdens doctrine says if the councils have new financial burdens, that money should come from central government and not from the local council taxpayer.
I guess taking some of the political statement out of what was just said, I can't disagree with you in terms of, you're correct in terms of the new burdens doctrine, but I think to date it's been quite clear that any new burdens funding that comes to this council and any other councils is specifically driven in terms of training, providing staff training. I guess this council is somewhat fortunate to have an earmarked reserve for this type, this sort of activity, but totally take on board the points that you've made, Councillor Williams.
Okay, Councillor Horwood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, as Councillor Wilkinson has eloquently said, many of us are very concerned about the damage being done to democracy by this appalling measure, and keen to make the hurdles as low as possible, the barriers to voting as light as possible. So in relation to just section 3.3 of the report, which is about the council-issued voter identification certificate, which is an alternative to all the other sort of forms of photo ID. First of all, can I ask, the wording in the report is a little ambiguous, and it says it implies that you can only have a special voter ID from the council if you don't have one of the others. So I wouldn't want people to have any kind of burden of proof that they hadn't got a passport or something like that. Can I just ask if actually you can just apply for a voter certificate ID without having to prove anything in the way of not having one of the others? And then the second question is whether or not we can look into making the provision of those voter ID certificates as easy and highly publicised as possible. I would have ideally had photo booths and certificate issuing stations in every polling booth, so that if you turned up without your ID, you could get one on the spot. But I gather you have to do it at least 5 days in advance of the poll, but perhaps officers could confirm that. But can we look into something like providing photo booths and other sort of high publicity ways of getting these voter certificate IDs as an alternative to the approved list?
Thank you for your question. I guess the answer is a sort of yes and no, in so much that anyone can apply for a voter authority certificate. However, when they use the portal to apply, they will be asked if they have one of the other acceptable forms of ID, and if they say yes, that they've got one of those other forms of ID, they will be informed that they don't need a voter authority certificate. I obviously haven't gone onto the system myself, but I guess if someone's got a passport and says no, they haven't got a passport, then they would by default be pushed through to applying for a voter authority certificate. In terms of the supplementary question, I guess in terms of putting polling booths in all of the polling stations, we have in excess of 50. I would think that's probably cost prohibitive in any case. But as you said, 3.6 of the report does say that the deadline to apply for such ID is 5 p.m, 6 working days ahead of the poll. But what we will take away to see is whether it would be feasible to have, say, one in the municipal offices or something like that, or we'll take that away.
Okay, and then
Supplementary then to that. Just supplementary to that first answer you gave. Sorry, supplementary to that first answer you gave about the online system. Is it right then that the online system is the only way to apply for these, or could somebody come to the municipal offices in person and apply for one?
I'm looking at Kim. I believe that somebody can come into the offices and apply for one.
okay, so the next question I've got Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I be clear about the source of funding? Clearly there is a lot of expenditure being incurred by this authority to deliver this appalling legislation. 1.1 refers to a balance of 67,000 in the Elections Equalisation Reserve, and it's budgeted that an additional 62,000 will be contributed to this reserve. Where is that £130,000 coming from, and could it otherwise have been spent on planting trees, for example?
The answer to that is no. Basically, the way that we have this particular reserve, as members will know, is we have elections every 2 years, and therefore in the years that we have an election we have greater costs than in the years that we don't have an election. So this year we don't have an election, so we're putting money into that reserve, and then obviously next year in 2024 we'll be taking the money back out of the reserve to pay it. So it's a smoothing effect rather than having it in the base budget every year.
So if we're putting money into the reserve, Paul, where is it coming from?
So I guess the best way that I can describe it is, I'll try and make this a really, really simple one. So let's just say the cost of an election is 60,000. In the base budget, we have 30,000. So we're basically putting 30,000 into the reserve 1 year, and then the second year it'd be topped up with the other 30,000 to pay for the 60,000 cost.
So what I'm not really clear about is there clearly significant additional expenditure being incurred by this authority. That must be coming from somewhere. I mean, is it not coming from government?
Some of it's coming through from government in terms of new burdens funding, but if this council wants to do additional activity to refranchise in voters, then obviously it would be at this authority's expense, which is why the recommendation is to utilise £20,000 in that particular reserve. Why is there slightly more in the reserve? So I guess I probably need to backtrack a little bit, because you did mention about could we use that to fund trees. Clearly, when we have multiple elections, i.e. with the police, the county, parliamentary, then those costs do get shared. So there is slightly more in the reserve than what is required to actually deal with our biannual cycle of elections.
Okay, and then the last question I've got is Paul McCloskey. I don't have anyone else indicating. But...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As most of you know, I no longer live in Cheltenham, so I had the joy of being involved in the local elections this time round. And one incident that occurred in the polling station I was telling at, in my own home ward, as it so happens, was somebody was turned away. They came with a valid passport, they came with their driving licence, they came with their old person's, senior citizen's bus pass. And the people at the polling station presumed to judge that the photos on the documents didn't agree with the face they were looking at. Now, I can think of all sorts of reasons like that. Somebody's had cancer treatment, they are now bald, or whatever else. I just wondered whether we could get clarification that this is about voter ID. You turn up with a valid document, or are the people at the polling station expected to make a judgment that the person in front of them looks like the person in the document? If so, what training are you giving all these people in the polling stations to make that judgment objectively and fairly? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McCloskey, for sharing that real lifetime experience. I haven't got the answer to hand, obviously. I'll take that one away, and we'll look into that for you.
Okay, and Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. I just wondered, I mean, it's sort of as a sort of aside to this particular issue, but will we be doing work with people where there's been boundary changes and they'll be moving to a different polling station to make sure that they're aware of that? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that brings us on to the debate section of this item. Do I have any speakers? Councillor Horwood.
Yes, I just want to draw, all councillors' attention to the fact that this is a really appalling measure that is an assault on local democracy. The supposed justification for this is that it is to protect us against electoral fraud, and yet the Electoral Commission says that proceedings were issued in just one single case of voter fraud last year and did not result in a prosecution. Voter impersonation is a significantly smaller problem than, say, the issuing of fixed penalty notices at number 10 Downing Street during the pandemic, where there were 20 more incidences in one single building. So the idea that this is really directed in that direction is also undermined by all the research by the Electoral Commission, which said that actually the existing system of personalised polling cards and essentially trust has worked very well, and that there are, quotes, very low levels of proven voter fraud in the United Kingdom. The government conducted a pilot in a handful of councils over a year ago, and that led to more than 1,000 people being turned away. Democracy volunteers observing our recent elections, and you know, it takes a bit of a leap of imagination when we think of election observers ensuring free and fair elections, that this is now taking place in the United Kingdom. But democracy volunteers found that more than 1% of voters, half of whom appeared to be from minority ethnic backgrounds, were turned away from polling stations because of the ID requirements. And further research by the BBC found that the number across the 230 councils that were voting showed that 26,000 voters were initially denied ballot papers, and of those 9,577 did not return even after the system was pointed out. And even that may be an underestimate, because actually lots of these councils had systems of greeters where people warned people before they even reached the polling station that they'd need ID. So actually thousands of people may not even have got as far as asking for a ballot paper inside. And the obvious explanation for it, given the fact that there is no real history of widespread voter personation in this country, is that this is simply gerrymandering. And it's on the same kind of voter suppression tactic that the Trump supporters are trying in the southern USA, overwhelmingly to try and suppress the black vote. But as Councillor Willingham quite rightly pointed out, this has effectively been admitted now by, I won't call him Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg yet, because he hasn't fallen under the sword, more's the pity. He said at the recent National Conservatism Conference, parties that try and gerrymander end up finding their clever scheme comes back to bite them, as I dare say we found by insisting on voter ID for elections. We found the people who didn't have ID were elderly, and they, by and large, voted Conservative. So we made it hard for our own voters, and we upset a system that worked perfectly well. This is exactly, of course, the opposite of what he said when he was Leader of the House of Commons, actually supporting the measure being introduced in the first place. I mean, it is outrageous that somebody in a position who is about to, you know, be honoured with a knighthood by Boris Johnson, of all people, is basically admitting to attempted gerrymandering of our democracy. It's an absolute disgrace, and we as a council, I mean, we have to follow the law and we have to implement this rubbish, but we should do everything in our power to make the barriers to voting in Cheltenham as light as possible, to make the hurdles as low as possible, and to do everything we can to make the system of voter ID, certificates from the council, humanly possible and as widely publicised as possible to try and mitigate the damage that this is doing to democracy. It's an absolute disgrace. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Jeffreys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Everything Councillor Hall just said. Pretty much everything he just said, with knobs on. Firstly, though, colleagues, I'd like to thank Paul and Kim for the information they provided us with, and also to thank them for actually all the hard work that goes on, all the officers within this council that work beavering away when there's not elections, because believe it or not, there's a darn sight amount, a huge amount of work that goes on. And I just put on record my thanks, I'm sure colleagues across the chamber would do so, that a lot of work goes on in these areas that we don't see day in, day out, and even more so at election times. But it is kind of scary, really, when you think about it. Councillor Hall touched on the fact we're not a third world country. Well, it seems to be that the previous Prime Minister is dragging this country back to be a third world country. Such low moral standing, it's unbelievable. And here we have a piece of legislation which we all know it doesn't work, which we all know favours one community over another, yet we are having to deal with it. I think it's an abhorrent dereliction of our democracy. It's scandalous. And I do hope that any incoming government that isn't of this such low moral standing will change it and rectify it. Even if you agree with voter identification, make it work for people. Whatever side of the debate around the real conversation around voter ID, whatever side of the debate you're on, let's make it work for our residents, not disenfranchise them, which is sadly what this legislation is doing. But I do welcome this report and welcome the efforts of officers to try and not disenfranchise many of our residents that this government is trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffreys. Next I have Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. I welcome this report and see it as the start of a much bigger piece of work to improve voter turnout and increase public participation in and engagement with local government. Prior to voter ID, we had turnouts in some wards of just 24%, and this is likely to drop further even with the interventions in this report. So I'm happy to support the recommendations, but I do think we do need to do much more on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And next I have Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Briefly, I do actually agree with part of what Councillor Flynn's just said. I think we need to focus more in making it local government more understandable to people too, actually. I think that is an issue. People don't always understand things as well as they should do. What I would say is I'd thank the officers, Paul and Kim and so on, for the report. I think there's a temptation which the Liberal Democrats are drifting into to reopen a debate on the whole principle, which we've done before. But with regard to the actual recommendations here, we are happy to support. And it's just worth making the point that the 20,000, of course, for publicity is in addition to what I understand will be a national awareness scheme, which is certainly run across the country for the elections in May of this year, if that's true. So we will support the recommendations.
Thank you. And then I've got Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd actually like to make a point which has come up from an email from one of the residents. Now, to explain, I've been pushing postal voting since COVID, trying to ensure that older people didn't go out to a public polling station that had very little take-up. Many of my older residents like to go and put the vote in the box. It's possibly an outing, I don't wish to be disparaging, but they want to do it. They want to go and make the cross and put the, regardless of their political persuasion. I would like to throw two ideas on the table. First of all, is this identity card by stealth? Is that what's happening here? Secondly, I had an email from an older resident who said, in response to a letter I had written encouraging a postal vote, this person said, I do not understand what's wrong with you. One needs voter ID wherever one goes at the moment. So what's the problem with it unless you've got something to hide? I entered into a conversation with this person with goodwill. I said, you're missing the point. This is addressing the part of the population that needs the vote most because they're in most need of local services, and they are the very people who do not have a passport, a driver's licence, or even maybe a bus pass. And we're trying to encourage them not to be disenfranchised. But somehow, reading through the emails, there were only 3 or 4, it smacked of racism to me, it smacked of elitism, and I'm just saying we need to be aware, before things get very divisive, what we're handling here, because strangely, my colleagues may be surprised to know, I lived in Brussels. I had an ID card and I worked with that system. It doesn't frighten me, but it is a whole other issue. ID card by stealth, or are we trying to deliberately exclude a section of the society, which both things are very sad. I would just like you to be aware of it.
Okay, and Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I wanted to thank Paul for his answer, and just to say that I do appreciate the political neutrality of the officers, and that was never in question in my question. I also want to thank the officers for the list of actions that they have got at 4.1 on the report. And I'm very glad to see that Cheltenham Borough Homes, our housing Almo, are including information about this in their digital and hard copy newsletter. I just wondered whether we could look to approach the other social landlords such as Bromford and Home Group, etc., and see if they will include that information because that seems something we're trying to do it for our housing, but we maybe need to do that for the other social housing if that hasn't already been done. But I do want to commend officers on the work that they are doing on this, because there is a positive here. We are trying to drive up engagement, and just to say thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other members indicating, so in that case, I will hand back to the electoral registration officer for any final comments.
No final comments in terms of summing up from me, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to go straight to the vote.
Okay, thank you. In that case, will members please vote on the keypads when it comes up? Thank you, members. That's unanimous. Moving on to item 10 then. This is the revisions to the Constitution. So for this item, I'm going to invite the leader, Councillor Hay, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor. So, some people see the Constitution as, that old document, but it's a really important document for this authority. It's part of it's the openness, transparency and inclusivity of this council, which are key fundamental principles for us. And as part of this, it's important that the public and members can understand the decisions we make and how we make them. The Constitution acts as our rule book, but we acknowledge that it can be difficult to navigate and understand, so that that means the Constitution Working Group, together with the Monitoring Officer, are working to change this. Members can see this reflected in the recommendations before them today. It should be a document that is updated regularly, as and when needed. And thanks to Claire Hughes and our Monitoring Officer and members of our Constitution Working Group for the work they are doing to make sure that we have our rule book up to date and fit for now and the future. And as members can see, there's a whole raft of documents that have come forward today for approval. I'm not going to, there's quite a bit in there that is technical answers or for officers, the conduct of officers, etc. We do need to approve that, but I'm not going to highlight those. I'm going to just highlight a few points that I think as members are important to us. So if members looked at paragraph 6 of the report, you can see the changes to the rules on substitutes, which will see a move away from named substitutes to a more open and inclusive process where any member of the same group can substitute for another. That is, of course, provided that if it's a statutory committee like licensing or planning, they must have attended the required training in order to do that. Paragraph 8.4.2 is the introduction of a key set of parameters around the submission of funding bids and acceptance of grants to enhance the council system of control and governance. We all know that over the recent years that we've had some very last-minute, late, short opportunities to bid for grants, etc., whatever organisation that might be. So it's important that we can be fleet of foot in doing that. Paragraph 9, to me, is a huge improvement in our bid to be more open and transparent. So a recommended change which will see us keep the webcasts of our meetings online and available for the public for 4 years, because as we all know, they've all gone again after 6 months currently. Paragraph 10, whilst Council is being asked to give authority to update the Constitution to allow the use of electronic signatures and seals, this will not be implemented until such time as a guidance document has been provided to members and officers, clearly setting out detailed parameters on use and highlighting any documents where electronic signatures are still prohibited by law, of which there are quite a few. I really welcome this because there's quite a lot of documents that I need to sign, but I need to be confident that actually those members that are using my signature, my electronic signature, actually have A, protection in place for themselves, and B, I have protection in place for myself before that is used. I also particularly welcome the flow chart in terms of our procedure for motions. I think that will help members when it comes to discussion of motions. I'm happy to answer any questions on this, but it might be a bit of a double act. If you've got more officer-based questions, I'll look to Claire. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hay. Just looking over... Sorry, Councillor Willingham, you first with questions then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got two questions. One is a sort of technical one on the electronic signatures, which is to just request that when we're looking at that, we make sure that the guidance that we've got does really look at the cyber security aspects and the security of the particular algorithms, because if we're using something that's out of date, then the sort of non-repudiation of electronic signatures starts to not be possible because someone could have forged the signature. So we need to make sure that our cyber security... So the question is, can we make sure that there is good cyber security guidance on that before we start doing it in earnest, because we don't want documents signed by the council. And the second question is one for something that we perhaps should look at in future, which is table 2 on page 31, which is functions of committees, lists the functions of a committee, of the planning committee, and the things that could go to planning. And the question would be that can prior approvals for telecoms masts have some public process other than people submitting written responses? Because I would say I'm not a 5G conspiracy theorist, but there are concerns, rightly from members of the public, that these masts are incredibly ugly, that the consultations, and I'll use quotes, consultations run by some of the operators are just sham consultations, where they don't consult all councillors and they don't respond to any comments back. So that's not consultation, that's just fake. And that they are not complying with the National Planning Policy Framework, which says things should be sympathetically designed, camouflaged where appropriate, and encourages things like mast sharing. And I really think that the public are being failed because they have no voice to raise their concerns on planning in regard to these applications. So the second question is, can we look at getting prior approval, some process where the public can come here, have their say and be listened to in person?
Thank you, Councillor William. I am fully aware of your emails and I'm not surprised that you've taken this opportunity to raise that at this point in time. I think can't give you an answer on that because that's going to be down to the planners. And as you know, there's email correspondence between you and Martin and myself, and we'll come back to that. But as far as the Constitution is concerned, I can't guarantee that that is something that can be changed because it would have to, A, certainly come back at a later date, and B, it would also have to have the consideration of what is legally allowed in terms of planning. The second point... Yes. The cyber... Yes is the answer.
Okay, Councillor Baker.
It's a couple of things, Mr. Mayor, just with my planning hat on, I suppose. We've got a planning training session coming up, 2-hour planning training session coming up, which is open to all members. I was struggling to find the date of it, I couldn't find it. But I would really encourage everybody from this council to come along to that seminar. Planning is an incredibly interesting subject. I am biased, but I love planning. And you know, it really does make a difference to people's lives. So I would really encourage you to come along to that session so that then you are able to deputise for members who can't attend. And as part of that, you would also then be expected to come to Planning View, which is an equally important part of the planning process. Just on Councillor Williams' point, legislation is such that mast applications cannot be referred to planning committee, sadly. But having said that, there is still a process of engagement, and officers have actually refused applications for masts in Cheltenham on grounds such as appearance and design. So there are grounds where these masts can be thrown out, and they have been. But it is nevertheless important that we engage with the community, that they are aware and that therefore they can make representations.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Baker. And I'm told it's the 29th of June is the date for the planning training. Are there any other questions? I can't see anyone indicating, so we'll move to debate. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Councillor Willingham, I saw you first then.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to echo Councillor Baker's comments regarding planning and say that as Chair of Licensing, I find licensing quite an interesting and exciting subject. And obviously, as the other regulatory committee, that needs training if one wants to sit on it. There's obviously in-house training, but also training through either the LGA or the Institute of Licensing if people aren't up to date. But given the technical nature of it, I would encourage people to do that training so that they can sit on licensing committee if others aren't available. Other than that, I'm very happy with the changes, especially the substitution, because I think that makes our lives as members across the chamber a whole host easier. And electronic signatures does bring us into the 21st century and what have you. So that is to be something that we should be happy to use where we can in the Constitution. Again, it saves paper. So yeah, happy to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Athelston.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I'd just like to say thank you to our monitoring officer and leader for making these updates to the Constitution. Actually, during the pandemic, we kind of accelerated our sort of digital transformation. And even though we were already on YouTube streaming our council meetings and cabinet meetings, and we were doing some sort of electronic signatures, it's great that this is now firm in our Constitution and that we'll be keeping videos available on demand for a much longer period, which is going to be so helpful, not only for councillors having to refer back, but also for members of the public getting much better access to activities within the council. So great that we're continuing to move forward in that trajectory, and also really refreshing to see that all references of gender, he, she has been removed. Because often, I don't know, I've got to be honest, I didn't see any in these particular updates, which was great. But often you read a document and it says he, and you're like, what about, So, taking away and switching it with there, fully supportive. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, we're happy as a group to support the recommendations, and particularly the greater flexibility on substitutions. I think it does help. To ensure we do get representation given the pressures on people's time. And I think it's a useful tidying up. I also agree with what Councillor Atherton said about recordings. I think it is important going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anyone else indicating to speak. So in that case, I'll invite Councillor Hay to make any final remarks before we go to the vote.
I think nothing really to add. There is a typo, however, which I should have, having signed it off, I don't know how I could miss it, but I did. But the typo is in recommendation 1. It should say diversity, not diversion. So other than that, I would ask Council to support the recommendations as they're set out.
Okay, councillors, you have your voting in front of you. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. Okay, that brings us now on to item 11, notices of motion. So we have two motions today. The first is proposed by Councillor Wilkinson, and this is on the Honeybourne line extension. So, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mayor. For almost a decade now, I've turned up to council meetings here and banged on about sustainable transport. And I banged on about the Honeybourne line quite a lot, and I've banged on about all other kinds of cycle routes and the need for more cycle routes in Cheltenham. I think during that time, public opinion has swung the way towards more sustainable transport links, and it's in that spirit that this motion is brought forward today. And this council is now committed to driving the sustainable transport agenda. We've commissioned the Connecting Cheltenham report, which members will recall from a few years ago. That's in possession of the County Council as the Highways Authority. We're working with them to attempt to deliver it. And GCC is the Highways Authority. They know our view. And it's also with that in mind that this motion is being put today. There are two elements to this motion. Both of them are on the Honeybourne line, which is a cherished green corridor which runs through our town, and it's used by people who walk, people who cycle, and people who go along the trim trail to exercise, people who walk dogs. It really is something that we must cherish and must be proud of, and that we must seek to improve. This motion refers to the long-running campaign to extend southwards from Cheltenham Spa Station to Shelburne Road, near Dean Close School, and it refers to a future opportunity to protect a corridor going northwards to extend the Honeybourne line in that direction. So I'll start with the southbound extension. That's from Cheltenham Spa railway station to Shelburne Road. It's basically the final outstanding part of the Cheltenham Spa car park upgrades. It's a quite complex project. When I was first encountering this, I just thought, well, we're going to do a cycle path that's a couple hundred yards. It's on land that isn't really used for very much. I could not have been more wrong. This has 4 partners involved at least. That's Network Rail, GWR as the rail franchise holder, the County Council, and the Borough Council. The Department for Transport is a contributor. Unfortunately, after many years of work and hundreds of hours of work by officers of this authority, of the County Council, GWR, Network Rail, the LEP, unfortunately, we got to this financial year and cuts to transport budgets and cuts to railway franchises meant that there wasn't enough money left in the pot. The project was some way delayed already, and construction inflation clearly had an impact and did not help. Network Rail put in lots of extra requirements for safety reasons because this is a line that will run right next to a railway line. I'd first like to start by paying tribute to the County Council and the Borough Council officers who kept this on track. It wasn't always easy working with so many different partners, particularly Philip Williams at the County Council, and in this authority, Tracy Birkinshaw, Jackie Jobs, and most recently, Simon Hodges. This stretch is integral to the County Council's Cycle Spine project, which you will have all read about. And the reason that this short stretch is really important is because it links up the area of the cycle path that stops at Lansdowne Road and then doesn't yet have a link onto the existing Honeybourne line. And it's with that in mind, I think, that the County Council has said that they are interested in delivering this scheme. I believe they are open to increasing the contribution. They've asked the Borough Council to be more open with our approach as well. And therefore, the obvious place to look is community infrastructure levy, developer contributions. And what this motion does is something very simple. It says basically that we are interested in exploring what we can do with community infrastructure levy to make sure that we're working with the County Council and those partners to remove this missing link on the cycle spine. And it's important because it means that it would take out the stretch of Gloucester Road, which, as we all know, is extremely busy. Traffic often speeds along there. It's unpleasant to cycle. So that's the southbound extension. And it's really important, before I go on to the northbound bit, to acknowledge that after this part of the project was announced that, well, after the announcement that this part of the project wasn't going to go forward in line with the timetable, the Cheltenham and Tewkesbury Cycle Campaign put together a really good petition, and there was a huge outpouring of sometimes emotion, but mostly support in favour of this scheme. And anyone who hasn't signed it yet can follow the links through the Cycle Campaign's website. So, we know that it has a decent amount of support from Cheltenham people. The second element of this motion is a little bit more far-sighted. So the southbound is an immediate project. It's needed as part of the cycle spine project in the immediate term. The northbound potential extension is much more long-term. It's one that should win support across this chamber because there's very little to disagree with. Local people will be aware that at the moment the Honeybourne line runs roughly as far as the Prince of Wales Stadium, and then it kind of stops and you can go left into some housing or you can go right towards Leisureat and Pitfield Park. But the former railway line runs a lot further north, and it's a protected corridor as far north as the Hunting Butts Tunnel, which could become a future extension. That land is owned by Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Steam Railway, and I hope members will have all been to the Steam Railway and enjoyed a day out riding the rails. This motion would see us explore policies to protect the corridor of land in our future strategic plans, and it would also see our officers open discussions with the Steam Railway as the landowners to explore this opportunity. But what isn't this motion? This motion is not a proposal for the Borough Council to ring-fence money, nor is this a proposal for any alternative route to any scheme that is currently under discussion or consultation. Any comments on those need to be directed to the correct authority. In the case of the cycle spine, of course, that will be the County Council. This is a potential future proposal that could be beneficial to all, to local residents, to people who cycle, to pedestrians, to dog walkers, and more. And I believe it could be beneficial to the Steam Railway too, an important heritage and tourism attraction that I support and I know this council supports. So I would urge you all to back this motion on these two specific points that have been raised, the southbound extension from Cheltenham Spa Station to Shelbourne Road, and that's in the immediate term, and in the longer term, the importance of protecting that corridor and extending the Honeybourne line, this cherished linear park, cycle route, pedestrian route, dog walking area, trim trail, whatever you want to call it, so we can produce something there that runs north for years to come. Thank you very much.
Okay, now I understand Councillor Atherston is the seconder for this, so did you want to speak now or over to you then?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Wilkinson, for bringing this really important motion to us today, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to second it, as I'm a huge fan of the Honeybourne line. Runs quite a lot through a long stretch of St Peter's, and it's just crying out to be extended. So it has been actually a long ambition of this council to improve active travel across our town, including walking and cycling, especially linking up busy transport hubs and routes towards Tewkesbury and Gloucester, as published in our Connecting Cheltenham plan all the way back in September 2019. So it's really, really great that we have been working with the County Council so far. The Connecting Cheltenham plan clearly points out the need to work in partnership, obviously with the County Council and transport providers such as GWR and Network Rail, and all of the relevant community groups. And this specifically pointing out the requirements for improved accessibility and inclusivity, specifically pointing to cycling that might not be a first choice for all of those wishing to cycle due to safety concerns. So safe routes such as extending the traffic-free Honeybourne line north and southbound are vital infrastructure improvements requirements for encouraging further active travel. Like most of you in this chamber today and residents across the town, I was delighted when I heard plans to extend the Honeybourne line south from Cheltenham Spa Station towards Shelbourne Road, the A40. And absolutely gutted and frustrated when those plans seemed to come to a bit of a halt. cycling along the very, very busy Gloucester Road to connect up with the Honeybourne line at the train station and the dangers specifically around the roundabout linking to Queen's Road is not a desirable experience and something that many cyclists would prefer to avoid. And this accessibility issue will become even worse, can you imagine, when the Earl Court Transport Hub is fully functional and the Golden Valley development is developed and people are living there and people are working there. As such, when I saw the petition on the 25th of April by Cheltenham and Tewkesbury Cycling Campaign, I did not hesitate to show my support by signing that petition and sharing widely. So I'd like to put on record massive thanks to Cycle Cheltenham for creating this additional required awareness and for the over, as Max said, over 1,000 signatures in support to date. So I fully support this motion, Max, especially for the southbound extension, and would like to call on the Council to continue to work with Gloucestershire County Council, GWR and Network Rail to find an alternative solution and explore other funding options, possibly, as Councillor Wilkinson mentions, the Community Infrastructure Levy Fund. This motion also quite rightly points out the need to extend the Honeybourne line northbound, linking the Prince of Wales Stadium towards Swindon Lane. As the motion mentions, this land is owned by Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Steam Railway, but remains unused and does offer a fantastic opportunity to increase environmentally friendly active travel, leisure and tourism by connecting the train station with the town centre and onwards up towards the Cheltenham Racecourse and Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Steam Railway itself. I'd like to please ask you all today to support this motion and that the relevant officers are able to engage with strategic planning to explore policies to protect this very special green corridor of opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So do we have any speakers? Councillor Harman, I think, was the first to indicate. And then...
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, happy to support the motion, both elements. I make a couple of comments if I can. I very much agree with Councillor Atherton about the Queen's Road roundabout. In fact, the area down there is really quite intense at times, both cyclists and pedestrian. I think it's quite important. With regard to the Gloucester and Warwickshire Steam Railway, and I am quite keen on it myself, I have been involved on it quite a few times. I have had a briefing with them a few years ago. I do know with regard to the land that might link down towards the Alston Level Crossing, they do have potential plans. So I think an early discussion with them is important. I believe also that they currently are quite having their hands full with fundraising for works to the Stanway Viaduct and are also looking to consolidate the success of their extension to Broadway. So it may be at the moment that they're not really clear where they're going. I believe they do own significant areas of land around Hunting Butts, which may be a financial way of funding what they want to do. So I would only encourage that early discussion with them and perhaps invite them in for a seminar, invite them in here for a seminar, involving county officers as well, because it is a great asset to us, that railway. And if at some point it does extend Honeybourne, then to Stratford, I think having that link through could be really fantastic for tourism here. So happy to support the motion, and you know, I think we can make some progress very soon.
Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. This motion, it's very messy, and I would say it's not very accessible either. Council notes, Council regrets, Council supports, additionally Council notes, Council recognises, Council instructs, Councillor asks. If a member of the public looked at this, they should easily be able to identify the recommendations, the actions. Can these be clearly articulated, please, and minuted? What actions are we being asked to support? Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if you wanted to come back there, Councillor Wilkinson, or if could we go to Councillor Willingham first, and then... Okay, thank you. Councillor Willingham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As you'll no doubt be aware, or no doubt guess, I'm very happy to support this as well as councillor representing St Peter's Ward, which contains quite a bit of the Honeybourne line. and until the boundary changes come, probably actually contains no houses but a very slim piece of St Peter's that goes all the way to the A40 that would contain this extension. And it is such a shame that we've had problems with Network Rail, but from my experience of them, we were trying to get litter removed from under a bridge in St Peter's, and the only way to get Network Rail to deal with this was to tell them that we were going, or I was going to take summary proceedings against them under the Environmental Protection Act. That's how intransigent they are. But then a Network Rail project failing to run to timetable and now cancelled. I mean, who can imagine that happening? It is such a shame that we have got to this situation. But again, it's symptomatic of Network Rail only really thinking about trains. In this case, they're not thinking about cyclists who might come and use the station, and we have other issues such as the downtimes at the level crossings, which cause huge amounts of traffic chaos for reasons that seem to not be very clear other than their convenience and not everyone else's. So I really hope that this council and the county council will work together to put pressure on the government through the Department for Transport, Network Rail and GWR, or whoever the next franchisee might be at whenever time that happens, because this really is an important link. If I look to the other end of the Honeybourne line, then that represents an opportunity to create a much longer and safer cycle route off-road. So that is something that I think would be a really good extra deliverable. At the weekend, I was out cycling around, and I bumped into a constituent who'd just come back from the Honeybourne line with their children, one of whom was on a bike, so they're getting safe cycling experience, not on the roads, which are, you don't want to take small children on the roads around here because just it isn't a safe place to learn to cycle. So by extending the Honeybourne line up, we have the potential to add extra links, a safer way for people to go up to the racecourse, a longer place for people to jog on if they're into running, and just a nice green track that people can use. And I think both of these things are really, really good projects. So protecting that corridor in the planning process is a very important first step, and certainly commend that. And whatever pressure we can put on Network Rail, DFT, and us working together with the County Council to get this delivered, I think is an important aspiration for both authorities. So I'm more than happy to support this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Willingham. Councillor Chelling.
Thank you. Yes, I support this motion, and I just wanted to add something from my residents who were quite excited about it extending southwards to Shelbourne Road, and particularly because that will enable school students to travel more safely, maybe from the centre of town and other parts of Cheltenham to places like Dean Close, and then onwards to Bourneside School as well. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other members indicating to speak. So in that case, I'll invite Councillor Wilkinson to sum up.
Thank you. Start with Councillor Chelling, she was last. I agree entirely. This is a really important link, the southbound extension for people who live in Park Ward, in the areas of Lansdowne, in the areas of Up Hatherley, Warden Hill, and many of those people who will benefit will be, I suspect, school students who are travelling safely, hopefully to and from Bourneside School and other primary schools in that area, Dean Close, etc. Councillor Flynn, I'll take on board your views about presentation. I'm sorry it didn't meet your high standards, and I will try to be clearer next time I write a motion for this council. For clarity, the actions that we're asking to be taken are in the paragraph that starts council supports, work with partners. And lower down, council instructs and council asks. I would hope that anyone who was reading the motion would have come up with those answers themselves, but I will take on board the fact that next time I'll need to use more bullet points and perhaps a summary at the end. Councillor Willingham, you raised the importance of partnership work. I absolutely agree. As you've stated, opening up the route northbound as well, that adds length, and it's a cycle route and a walking route, which will basically touch the northernmost boundary of the developed part of this town as it currently stands. And then it would link towards the station and onwards, and then into the cycle spine. And also you've picked up the important point about public health, which Councillor Atherstone also picked up in seconding this motion. And of course, the key reasons why we need to support walking and cycling are that we need to boost public health of everyone in this town and our visitors. And that can only be good news for the NHS in future, because we know one thing about public health is that sedentary lifestyles breed long-term chronic difficulties for people who lead them. Councillor Harman, I'm sorry he's not in the room to hear the response to his comments. He's absolutely right. I'm glad to see that he's a supporter of GWSR as well. And he's picked up one of the key points in this motion, which is that we need to talk to GWSR and find out what proposals they might have for that land. And I think doing that formally via our officers as a result of this motion is something that will be extremely important. And the fact that we will ask our officers to then report back by the end of this year sets a clear deadline for us to know what kind of policies we might put in place and what might be a point for negotiation with GWSR. So given that nobody disagreed, I'm hopeful that we can have cross-chamber support for this. Thank you.
Okay, you should have the voting coming up shortly. Everyone. Okay, that's everyone. And again, that is carried unanimously. Okay, so now that brings us on to motion B. So this is on refugee champions. The proposer here is Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Coincidentally, today marks the beginning of Refugee Week. So how appropriate that we here should be discussing refugees. And just as a quick precursor and a quick promotion, I would like to bring your attention to a film which is being promoted by Cheltenham Welcome Refugees this week at the Playhouse on Thursday at 7 o'clock, a film called Limbo, which talks about and explains and brings to our attention the difficulties and the hardships and the hopes of refugees. Sadly, I can't go because I've got a SIL meeting, but I would hopefully catch up with it at some stage, and I hope many of you here will be able to go along and show your support. So I'm pleased to propose this motion, which will be seconded by Councillor Tabby Joy. The motion firstly reflects on the positive progress that Cheltenham Borough Council and Cheltenham Borough Homes have made since we adopted sanctuary town status in 2019. It then seeks to further develop that progress by appointing up to 4 refugee champions to work with and help promote the aims of Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees, to make Cheltenham a welcome home for refugees and asylum seekers. And finally, it records this council's strong objection to the illegal migration bill currently going through Parliament. Firstly, I should make clear, as many of you will know, that I am honoured to be a trustee of Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees. And since retiring last year, I've been able to become far more involved in their activities. It has been a humbling and rewarding experience. I have met many refugees and many asylum seekers. They are inspiring people, often with young children, who have fled appalling circumstances, risking their lives to save their lives in search of a safe and secure future. And I've met people who have crossed the Channel in a small boat, including a 23-year-old mother from Eritrea with an 18-month-old daughter. Can you begin to imagine that story? We are all incredibly lucky to live in a safe and beautiful town, in a safe and wonderful country. No one wants to be a refugee. No one wants to be an asylum seeker. In our motion, we outline some of the progress we have made in the last few years to help refugees and asylum seekers here in Cheltenham. It is significant, and we should all be very proud of what has been achieved. I also want to acknowledge the incredible dedication and hard work of many of our officers, in particular Richard Gibson and his team, and Nigel Potter and a brilliant team at Cheltenham Borough Homes. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the support of the Everyman Theatre and so many of our local primary and secondary schools who have welcomed children from refugee and asylum seeker families. Those teachers and staff, and indeed pupils, have been incredible. I had an opportunity to catch up with some of the refugee asylum seeker children at the Pitfield Park picnic recently, and they are so happy to be at school, making new friends and engaging with our community. It is incredibly emotional to see the smile on their faces. Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees is a volunteer charity which does an amazing job, including the provision of English language lessons, transport, bicycles, clothes, drop-in centres, a monthly community cafe with freshly cooked food, children's entertainment, conversation and support, picnics, football training, matches, and also, I must also thank Cheltenham Town Football Club, who have provided tickets for refugees and asylum seekers to attend matches here in Cheltenham. By appointing up to 4 refugee champions, this council can help promote those activities, both within this council and to the wider community, in a huge variety of ways, some of which are suggested in the motion. I can guarantee that those champions will be humbled and rewarded as I have been. I've always regarded Cheltenham to be a friendly, welcoming and generous town, and it is all of those things. I've always regarded my country to be a friendly, welcoming and generous country, and I firmly believe that the vast majority of our population retain those values. Our country has an incredible record of welcoming those fleeing war, conflict and persecution. But sadly, that reputation is being damaged by this government's latest illegal immigration bill. A bill which has been widely condemned by human rights organisations, religious groups, charities, as well as Liberal Democrats, Labour Party members, Green Party members and politicians, and, to be fair, a small minority of Conservative politicians too. And no doubt it will be thrown out by the House of Lords. The simple answer to the small boats problem is to provide safe routes. If there were safe routes, why would you risk your life in an inflatable dinghy? The simple answer is to properly resource the processing of asylum seekers to deliver quick decisions, saving millions of pounds on accommodation. Please not pretend hotels are the hotels that you and I might want to stay at. Far from it. The hotels they are staying at are a room with no cooking facilities, no communal facilities, food delivered in a plastic box. It's not a hotel, believe you me. I have met asylum seekers who have been here for more than a year, in that room with their children, in the middle of nowhere, with no money to get to anywhere. I couldn't imagine doing it for a week. And they're still waiting to have their first interview. Consider what human cost to their mental health and what financial cost to the taxpayer. And yes, send back economic migrants and those fleeing safe countries like Albania. But most asylum seekers eventually are granted refugee status. Since Brexit, this country has lost thousands of workers in all categories of employment: the NHS, the care sector, bus drivers, agriculture. The list is endless. According to the British Chamber of Commerce, British businesses are crying out for people to fill jobs at all skill levels. In February this year, there were 1.134 million job vacancies in this country. And we can begin addressing that problem by allowing refugees and asylum seekers to seek work at the earliest opportunity. The refugees and asylum seekers I have met have a huge variety of skill sets, from bus drivers to vets, from cybersecurity to marketing. Part of the answer is here. Government just needs to get its head together and sort this out. The Rwanda plan, if it ever happens, is set to cost £140 million, plus £13,000 per person removed by charter flight. Even a Home Office minister admitted on the 12th of May that the controversial policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda will not save taxpayers' money. But more than that, it is to quote the Archbishop of Canterbury, who said that the bill was morally unacceptable. Our MP supports this proposal. The least we can do is express our unanimous dismay and ask him to reconsider. I beg to move.
Thank you, Councillor. That was bang on your 10 minutes. So, seconding the motion, I have Councillor Joy. Did you want to speak now, or yeah, Councillor Joy?
Hi. So, I would really like to say thank you so much to Councillor Baker just for proposing this motion. Just the fact that CWR Cheltenham Markets Refugees has been in operation for coming up to 8 years now. And considering they're purely volunteer-led, they actually have only recently reached charitable status, and before they were a constituted organisation, they've achieved an immense amount purely through volunteer engagement. And they've also been able to expertly navigate between supporting displaced people and helping them settle in Cheltenham, as well as, actually liaising with the public and just trying to dismantle some of the most harmful ideas and prejudices about refugees and those seeking asylum. The thing is that it's absolutely true that they do face a lot of hostility even here. CWR in particular have done a lot of work on the ground to liaise with local people, and they sometimes have confronted some rather challenging attitudes about people who don't believe that incredibly vulnerable people should be, given sanctuary and just allowed to rebuild their lives, even though, them being here, was caused by absolute brutality and remorseless mercilessness. The thing is that none of this is an ideal situation. It's really, really difficult for me because many of my friends are refugees from many different countries, even from America. I have a friend who's a medical refugee because she aged out of her parents' medical insurance. It doesn't cover her type 1 diabetes. So the thing is that, you know, this is a complex subject in some ways because it covers so many different individual circumstances, and yet it's purely simple that we have assets that it makes moral good sense for us to be able to share it because people reciprocate so much. Working with people at the CWR hub, so that would be people seeking asylum, they ask questions like, how can I give blood? How can I volunteer? They immediately want to give back. A lot of refugees, they don't even see themselves as refugees. It's not a label they ascribe to themselves. It's a way that we view them. It's a label that we assign to them. And really, they're just doing all they can just to survive. That's not an unreasonable thing. They're doing whatever they can to protect themselves and their families and their children. In some ways, like Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees has been able to have that sort of like, you know, event planning, community liaison. But Gareth, the Gloucestershire Action for Refugees and Asylum Seekers, their workload is overwhelming. They face significant underfunding while they do have, you know, highly trained legal professionals, you know, doing casework and putting everything together to protect people and keep them here because they need to be, you know, kept safe in the UK. The thing is that, like, on a single morning, you may have somebody who is having their status approved after 6 years of seeking asylum in the UK, and then you'll have someone deported. So this is, it doesn't, Rwanda is actually just the tip of the iceberg. This is something that's been going on for a really long time. And the situation is changing all the time. The fact that since CWR was founded, they started with supporting Syrian families and then moved on to having to, you know, pivot to supporting Afghani people, to protecting Ukrainian people. It changes all the time. There's almost a new crisis every year, and it's so hard to respond proactively to this. I really welcome attempts that we can make to be proactive and to try and give all the support that we possibly can, because, you know, ultimately we're talking about people, human beings. Like, you know, we would hope that we can extend hospitality and dignity and welcome to people, you know, almost in the hope that it could never happen to us. You know, we're not in a position to get complacent. You know, the thing is that we don't necessarily have laws that are objectively based in moral standing. The fact that, you know, sometimes things can turn on a dime, you know, we can't get complacent about it, and showing solidarity with other people, I really think is a moral imperative. I'm really excited to potentially have a CBC refugee championship motion, and I would be really happy for anyone to run for it, to learn more about it, to become genuinely excited by it, because it's a lot like, you know, we could become overwhelmed by, you know, the situation. Ultimately, the friends that come to us have come from a bad situation. It's only because they have suffered immeasurable trauma that they're here with us. But we can turn things around. We can change their lives, and, you know, we can build something better outside of what they've had to go through. How am I doing for time?
You are just over time now.
Okay. But thank you so much for considering this. I really appreciate it.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Joy. Okay, the first speaker I have is Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really welcome this motion. Colleagues will remember back in 2015 the crisis that was hitting Syria, and this town's empathy, and like I say, the creation of Cheltenham Welcomes Refugee was actually that empathy culminating in these volunteers getting together. And I was so inspired by that collection of people with such an outpouring of empathy for other human beings. And Paul mentions quite rightly the kids in amongst all of this, and then the adults. And I can remember when I had my builder's van back in the day, moving some furniture to volunteer for Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees and taking it around to a house that had been let by the volunteers for a family. And 2 teenage boys gave me a hand to move what was a chest of drawers and 2 beds into what was an empty 2-bedroomed house. And inside the house was their mother and a volunteer trying to find this lady's sister. These teenagers were shell-shocked, and I genuinely didn't really relate to the phrase shell-shocked until that point. Really. And so this organisation supported this family and many others. And I've talked to refugee families and refugees across the town. They are just human beings like us. They just want to live normal lives like us. So I'm humbled by what this town does in support of refugees and guests we have in across the town. And I welcome the motion. On the point about the government's illegal migration bill, I mentioned previously when we mentioned a piece of legislation was utterly diabolical. This one just takes the biscuit. I've watched the debate in the House of Commons where actually in the front of the bill it says this bill will break international law, or potentially break international law. I can't remember the exact words, so forgive me. So here we are, we have a government which is bringing forth the most repugnant piece of legislation I've ever looked at that is going to effectively break international law. Why? I don't know what their motivations are. To stop the boats. Well, ironically, they're stopping boats by actually buying bigger boats to turn them into hotels. It's crazy, ludicrous. Legislation ludicrous. The direction of this government's ludicrous on this issue. It's very simplistic in my mind, although it is, I'm sure, hugely complicated. That is about safe and legal routes and processing the applications. Because, Councillor Baker, you're 100% correct. If people aren't meant to be here, they're not meant to be here. If they're allowed to be here, let's welcome them. Let's get them involved in our society. Paying taxes, working, bedding roots. So thank you for bringing this motion, Councillor Baker and Councillor Joy, and I fully support it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Collins.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, for letting me speak. And well, thank you to Councillors Baker and Joy for proposing and seconding this motion. Some of you know I'm a member of the Homes for Ukraine scheme already, and I feel it's a privilege because I'm able and fortunate enough to do it. Some people aren't. I've got spare bedrooms and spare bathrooms, and it's just nice to learn things from somebody from a different culture. It's not simply a case of saying, there you go, mate, there's a house, there's a bed, you're sorted. It's so much more complicated than that. They need an awful lot of support. Many of these people are traumatised, and they need support. They need all the support they can get, in fact. I don't think we can give them enough. Notwithstanding, we've still got people in this country who say things like, oh, we don't need them here. Why aren't they? Why aren't we helping our own poor people? You know, we've got other things to be sort of spending our money on. My guest, 2 points. My guest, sadly, her default is not to go to Gareth or to Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees, but it's to her own Ukrainian community for help and support and advice on what she should be doing. So that says that we need to be doing an awful lot more than we already are doing. And by the way, she works really hard. She works nights at Wentworth Court Care Home as a carer. She leaves my house at about 7 o'clock in the evening. She takes 2 buses, one into town and one from town out to the care home. She works a 12-hour shift, and then she does it all in reverse to come back. So her day's at minimum of 14 hours. And if she needs to go shopping or she needs to go and have a meeting on her way home, she has to do that as well on top of that. So there's an awful lot to her day in her life. And I think hats off to her that she does that. And you know what? She's paying tax and national insurance too, so we can perhaps debunk that myth. I'm not comparing myself in any way, shape or form to asylum seekers or refugees, but I know how difficult it is to live abroad because I did it myself. I mean, I only moved to work and live in Spain for a couple of years, and I needed all sorts of support because I didn't know what to do. I was in a foreign country with these foreign people looking at you, and, you know, not all of them are helpful, not all of them are friendly. So I needed all the help I can get. So these guys, for me, I think we as a nation and as a town, we should be proud and happy to help and give them what we can. And in Cheltenham, there are our new residents and guests. And we should be doing everything we can and more to make sure that their time here is happy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Seacombe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I moved to Cheltenham 57 years ago, I was told that there was left over from the war a Ukrainian community which was helping us, and their descendants are still here today. These are being bolstered by other Ukrainians coming into this country. And we on the, I say twinning, but it should be International Partnership Committee, you've got to get used to that, it's no longer the Twinning Committee, are proposing, and Councillor Boyes is assisting in this, a picnic in Naunton Park on the 14th of July, that's a Friday night, and that's our small contribution to making our Ukrainian visitors feel more welcome. I just give you that date. We'll try and keep you updated with how well it's developing and so on. But I'm just saying that that's our small international partnership contribution to the current situation.
Thank you. And on that note, Councillor Boyes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to thank Councillor Baker and Councillor Joy for bringing this motion, especially on the day before World Refugee Day. And I am delighted with the great work that's been achieved since Max and I brought our motion back in 2019. I also want to thank and praise the absolutely fantastic work of Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees and Gareth, working tirelessly to support and welcome refugees in Gloucestershire. We as a council must also continue to do all that we can, and I think that this strongly worded motion delivers just that. This is a subject very close to my heart, having long supported a refugee charity, twice volunteered at the refugee camps in northern France. I know firsthand how dire the situation is for refugees and those seeking asylum. It was utterly heartbreaking to see young boys not much older than my own children seeking refuge, having travelled the length of Europe alone, families separated and desperate. In light of the extremely complex, growing international refugee crisis, which this government is simply failing to address at source and here in the UK, and with the growing divisions in society driven by the utterly vile and dangerous rhetoric being spewed by the right-wing press and espoused by members of the government, it is vital that as a council and a town, we lead the way in showing compassion to others. The labelling as illegals and this anti-migrant strategy only serves to dehumanise asylum seekers and refugees, and it's utterly shameful. We have an asylum system in tatters, or I have to sit down, sorry. We have an asylum system in tatters, and there are very few safe and legal routes to the UK for those seeking asylum. And even if they reach the UK, they are not permitted to contribute to our economy by being allowed to work. It's an utter disgrace and a failure on so many levels. I could talk a lot about this, but I'll stop now and say that this motion has my complete and utter support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Boyes. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is very, very personal to me, actually, and I debated whether I was going to speak today because it's so personal. I'm not sure if Conservative supporters of the illegal immigration bill, I don't know if they've been friends with asylum seekers. I don't know if they've fallen in love with asylum seekers. Well, I have. 33 years ago, I fell in love with an asylum seeker who didn't have the correct papers, and I'm still with that asylum seeker, who's now a British citizen. This country, I can't explain the level of gratitude that he felt for this country at that time, because it did the right thing. And we still feel that gratitude. However, what we have noticed is a kind of othering of outsiders. It started with Brexit, with European citizens, but that othering has extended to a broad range of groups, asylum seekers. It's also extended, I would argue, to the trans community, but that's a separate issue. What we've also seen is people who should know better, like Suella Braverman, and I believe our MP, Alex Chalk, referring to the will of the British people when they talk about the illegal immigration bill. Well, I would say very strongly, it's not my will. What I would also say is don't judge outsiders. This outsider, who I've been lucky to be with, has been the most brave person I will ever know, has been bombed for this country, shot at for this country, arrested for this country, in a way that I don't know a single Indigenous British citizen who's taken those risks with their lives on behalf of this country. So don't other outsiders, welcome them, and I would ask my Conservative colleagues to search deep within their hearts, because this isn't the Britain I know and love, and I support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. I don't have any other indications to speak. Sorry, Councillor McCloskey.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you, Julian, because it's really important that we hear things like that. I also wanted to quote from our own corporate plan. In the introduction it says, we want our residents and communities to thrive, not just survive. And I think that should be printed on the front of every document that this council thinks about, because we do want everybody to thrive. And the descriptions we heard in the proposals and the seconders comes about existence in some of these grotty places that are purported to be hotels. That is not how anybody thrives. And we have to set the bar a lot higher in everything we do. It's there in our corporate plan. This is one step on that journey. I fully support the motion.
Thank you. And Councillor Athelston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too fully support this motion, and I'm very grateful for Councillor Baker and Councillor Joy bringing this motion to us today. And just like to echo the thanks to Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees and Gareth and all the other local community groups all around Cheltenham, including churches and schools and the college, etc., that are really going a long way to welcome both refugees and asylum seekers that are arriving in Cheltenham, and to remind everyone that Cheltenham is a town of sanctuary, and this motion to introduce 4 champions for refugees is something that I can only assume is going to be unanimously approved and voted for today. And when that does happen, I'm very much looking forward to working with those 4 champions. As Cabinet Member of Housing, I do have some portfolio responsibilities for ensuring that we have enough homes for our visitors when they arrive. So, yeah, fully supportive, and thank you.
Thank you. And next I have Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully support the spirit of this motion. We are talking about asylum seekers, and they really need our help. My nephew in Pinner took in an Iranian mother and her child, and they had them for 6 months, and they fully supported them. I would take in anybody if I had a spare room, and I could. But unfortunately, I fully support the principle, and I fully support giving asylum seekers shelter and helping them and getting them into work and giving them homes. But these are illegal immigrants that don't have a legal right to be here. So I'm sorry, I'm going to be abstaining.
Okay, I don't have any other finals.
Sorry, that very last statement, we are saying legal and illegal immigrants, but so-called illegal immigrants are only illegal because someone has said they're illegal. All immigrants, however they come here, I mean, I'm just thinking something that Councillor Baker said right at the beginning about us as an Englishman, and I think we're all probably the same. I am extremely privileged to have been born in this country of English parents and get to live here. And I just think, all right, I might moan that I have to renew my bus pass every few years, that my supermarket might not have the product I would like to see. But what would it take me to put my family in a little inflatable boat and come across the channel, put their lives in danger, walking for hundreds of miles, etc., etc. What would it take me to do that? and having to put up with the few little moans and groans that I have is not sufficient. So I think we should look at all migrants, whether legal or illegal, and fair enough, if they don't need to be here, if they are simply economic migrants and they haven't really got anything to offer this country, then fine, they should go to somewhere better, somewhere more suitable. But, and I don't mean Rwanda, but we should consider all migrants that come to this country, and we shouldn't be trying to decide, well, is it legal, is it illegal? Because a lot of those so-called illegal migrants are only illegal because someone has said they are.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wheeler. I don't have any other indications to speak, so I'll hand back to Councillor Baker to sum up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a really good debate, very emotional for some, because we're talking about people and children who are fleeing persecution. So it's an emotional subject. And when you talk and meet asylum seekers, you can only share and be humbled by their experiences. Councillor Nelson, the government is changing the rules. The only way you can apply for asylum is to be on British soil. You can't apply for asylum from a British embassy. You have to be here. As I said in my presentation, I think it's about 70% or more of asylum seekers are eventually granted refugee status. In other words, they're legal. This government is making everybody illegal, whether they've got a good ground to come here or not. It's frankly disgraceful. And I'm so disappointed that you can't support this motion. I'm not going to go on because there's massive support for this, but what's interesting is that of all the asylum seekers who have then got refugee status and all of the refugees that have come to Cheltenham, they want to stay here. And I think that says a lot about what Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees does, but beyond that, it says a lot about what this town has to offer and what this town is all about. So I beg to move, and thank you all very much for your support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baker. With that, we'll move to the vote. So hopefully we should have that coming up shortly. Okay, and that is carried with 28 for and 4 abstentions. We'll now move on to item 12. So I'm mindful of the time, but if we just cover off a couple of items and then we'll take a short break. Item 12 is any other item the Mayor determines as urgent and which requires a decision. There are none, I should say. And then item 13. So this is a financial and legal matter. For this item, we need to take a vote to move into closed session. So I'll just read out the relevant passage and we'll need to then vote on it. So the committee is recommended to approve the following resolution, that in accordance with section 100A part 4, Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining agenda items, as it is likely that, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, if members of the public are present, there will be disclosed to them exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 and 5, Part 1, Schedule 12A, Local Government Act 1972. Namely, paragraph 3, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information, and paragraph 5, information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. Can we have the vote on that, please? Or show of hands, sorry. Keep it sort of simple. That is carried.